Picture this. You are giving a presentation to a new customer about this app or this dashboard your team created. You explain all the cool technical features at length. You feel good, you think you killed it since you prepared for so long. And at the end, the customer was not interested. What went wrong? They just don't get it, right? Perhaps you did not bother to put yourself in the feet of the customer. You did not show enough empathy. Something similar happened to my guest, Jeremy Adamson. Jeremy is the author of the book Geeks with Empathy. He is a leader in AI and analytics strategy and has a broad range of experience in aviation, energy, financial services, retail. You will learn today how to build empathy with those around you to bring you better results at work. He says that at the root of every tech problem, there is an empathy problem. Let's listen. All right. Wonderful. So thank you, Jeremy, for joining me on the podcast today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Excited to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
And I really enjoyed the book Geeks with Empathy because it just provided a lot of great information that we all need to know, all of us that work in tech.
Mm.
And as I was going through the book, I was marking down a lot of things like, you said it so well. So before we go into the specifics of the book, I want to understand in terms of your own background. So what made you choose your particular career field? Was it engineering?
Yeah, well, it was a bit of a long, convoluted path to get to where I am, actually. I sort of grew into it, or maybe the field grew around me. I started off actually as a cook. That was my big passion when I was growing up, and I actually cooked professionally for about 5 years, and as a part-time hustle because that doesn't pay the bills. I was making websites as well, so I always had good technical intuition, but it was only ever a hobby, and cooking was my big passion, and I learned a lot there about hospitality, customer centricity, and a lot of things that I still I think rely on now. It gave me a certain pain threshold as well. No matter how stressful things get in tech, it's never as bad as working in a restaurant at 6 p.m. on a Friday. But that would have been uh, early 2000s, actually. So this would have been around the time of the first dot-com crash, and the work dried up, and I decided to become a grown-up. And I went to university, and I took civil engineering with a big focus in transportation engineering. And from there, I did a few, normal jobs. I was a project manager, traffic impact studies. I designed gusset plates for bridges. It was boring, repetitive stuff. But I worked on a project that brought everything I'd done together. So I was finishing my master's in collision prediction models, and I was doing a project at work that changed the way we did capital allocation for a government agency by incorporating these models. So it required a lot of data work, a lot of applied statistics, a lot of selling the idea to stakeholders. And this was before there was data science as a field. I was called decision support services, but it was a light bulb over my head moment, and it was the first time since cooking where I thought, I really love what I'm doing. This is what I'm meant to do. So I did an MBA, and since then I've been going between organizations, helping them start and lead high functioning technology teams. So really long, convoluted path to get here, but very fortunate that I found something that I love to do.
Awesome. Interesting that pathway from cooking to, to
Uh,
going ahead and working with teams. But it's critical what you mentioned there about customer centricity, which is a lot of what you address in the book in
mhm.
terms of building empathy with our customers, because we're all basically doing customer service.
Yeah.
So what before we start and delve more into the lessons of the book, how do you define empathy?
Yeah, there's I think when I say empathy, when I'm talking to stakeholders, when I'm talking to coaching practitioners, they tend to think of empathy just as niceness. I'm going to give them what they want. I'm a little bit naive and just
Hmm.
a people pleaser. And I think it's important to put it in really mechanistic terms, especially if you're speaking to technology people. And all it is trying to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're speaking with. And it's a small, simple thing, but it's profound at the same time. It's a critical step when you're working with someone is to understand what's important to them, and that's just something that we, as technology workers, rarely do.
Yeah, I like the example that you mentioned in terms of, and I've seen that many times in terms of when we go to a presentation to, present a particular product or present, we focus on all the whiz bangs of all the features of a specific product without necessarily focusing on like the so what for them. Talk about your experience in regards to that, about any particular experiences that you had. Were you that type of person before that will provide like, hey, look at this thing, look at all the stuff and the cool features it has?
It was, yeah. And that's actually how I start the book, and how I open it up is with the first comments I got when I started doing that. It was with that government job, the one that I had mentioned. It was a light bulb over my head moment, and
Hmm.
I had an amazing leader. He put me in front of this project, and I was fortunate. Of course, I was doing my master's on the same thing at the time. I was very deep in the technical details, and then I had an opportunity to present this work to the most senior executive in the organization. And I spent dozens of hours rehearsing. I put together this 50, 60 slide
Oof.
presentation from base principles. And this person graduated university in the 1970s, very non-technical. I didn't know anything about them besides their name. And I kind of went in there and I gave a lecture. It was from base principles. This is why this is going to work. This is why it's cool. And I went out of there thinking that I had, just earned myself a promotion, and this guy was going to recognize how smart and talented I was. And I got a note from my boss who got me that opportunity to present it. And I strutted over to his office thinking that that promotion was seconds away. And he said, "I just got a note from the guy, and he said that you were a turnip, and that I had wasted his time." And
Oh God.
I was furious. I thought that guy's a fool, and you're a fool. Everybody's a fool but me. And he didn't let me get away with it. I vented with him for a little bit, and then he said, "Your job was to sell this to him. It wasn't to show him how smart you were. You went in there and you tried to sell it to yourself." And I realized that's exactly what I did. And we worked through like what is important to this guy, what are his values, what are his motivations, what's keeping him up at night. And I went from a 60 slide deck to like 2 or 3 slides, a conversation addressing his pain points. We had a half-hour conversation and he stamped the project. It was approved. So, I would have saved so much time if I had just thought, who am I actually selling this to? And that never occurred to me until that point in my career. So definitely hurtful to be called a turnip early on, but it was the best thing that ever happened to me.
That's great. And you hit great points there about knowing the customer
Mm.
first, because I've seen it so many times too, in terms of, when we think about the customer, it's like, oh, they just don't get it. They just don't realize they don't want change, or they don't understand the technology and all that stuff. So, but addressing, you mentioned a key lessons there about knowing their customer, knowing who they are, what are their pain points, and talking through those things as you present a particular solution or anything. What other lessons do you consider that for a person in a team right now that's about to do a presentation to somebody about, get their buying on a specific product? What other thing would you suggest they do?
I always try to know the person as an individual, and not just where they are on the org chart, who their team is, what they're working on. People will come into every interaction, whether they realize it or not, with a lot of preconceived notions. And it could be something as simple as something they heard in the news earlier in the week about generative AI, and they have a little bit of, their techno emotional posture isn't great. So they're coming in defensive. And if you don't know that and they start asking questions about generative AI taking jobs away from creatives and get completely off topic, you're caught on the wrong foot. You don't know what to do. You're trying to steer it back away, but they have this passionate point of reference that you're never going to address if you don't know them as an individual. And I always try to, have coffee, have meals with people, because when you're in a boardroom, when you're meeting people, we always put on our personas, we put on our masks. And I'm Jeremy, the analytics guy. You're Tony. You're in the business, and we're going to go through the theatrics and all of these things that we always do. We're going to talk a little bit about the weather, a little bit about the project. We're going to close. We're going to talk about our action items. But when we go for lunch, we talk about our families. We talk about what's important to us, and those masks really go away, and it's just Jeremy and Tony at that point. So I try as much as possible not to meet people professionally that I haven't had coffee or lunch with at least once. It just takes those masks away, and you can be real with people.
Yeah, that's so critical to establish that connection with folks. And because, yeah, as you say, it's like putting hats on folks that, there's a techie, there's the business guy, there's the other things. And as you mentioned in the book too about the our role, or the role of the people that we work with as, in tech, that there before perhaps there used to be that model more of like, there's a business person and then just a tech person, and then the business person translates to the tech person and things along those lines. But right now there's like a flatter aspect of, the person who does the work, the data scientist, the data analyst, or whoever, or the developer. They're kind of like the person of also with there's a direct contact with the customer.
Yeah.
How have you seen that shift throughout, in the past decade, in terms of the roles that the person in tech has to play?
We haven't adapted very well to it, and I think that we have tried to replace the human interactions and understanding our customers with process. And we've done it with the best of intentions, because we want to start a project with very concrete requirements. If we achieve this and meet your objectives, then we can call this project done. We can move on to the next one. And we try to get them to commit in advance to what they want. So they go through an onerous form intake process. And then we squirrel away and we cut that up into little individual pieces, and we give that to our team. You do this piece, you do this piece. We'll stick it together. We'll give it to this person, and then we'll disappear. And we went into that, I think, with the right intentions, and we didn't have the outcome that we thought we were going to with that. We took every one of those people, when we broke that project up and gave it to them, we took them further and further away from the customer that they were working with, and we took any semblance of meaning out of their work. So it's reduced the engagement on the team, and then it's increased stress for people that act as that intermediary, because you're meeting them once, you're trying to get everything you can out of them, and then you're disappearing and then giving it back to them. And the worst part, I think, is that we call that agile. We work in 2 week sprints from a operational and technical perspective, but we only meet the customer once, and then we come back at the end and give it to them. And we use agile, I find, as a bit of a shield. I'm not going to talk to you until the start of the next sprint type thing. So we use it to remove our obstacles, and it's completely against the original agile manifesto around customer centricity. So I think we've sadly moved further and further away, even though on paper organizations are flatter and we're closer to our customers. I think emotionally and socially we're further than we've been in the past.
You hit a nerve here in terms of
Mm.
agility, because when it comes to agile, and I'm myself being an agile coach for teams,
Mm.
it's that focus sometimes that I see a lot with frameworks and following the right steps on a particular agile quote unquote framework, but we forget about the key aspect, which is like it's about connection with the customer, that collaboration, as you mentioned in the agile manifesto, is one of the principles.
Mm.
And in terms of the I like that you talk in the book a lot too about it's important to meet the people, as you mentioned, but also you provide some guidelines in terms of starting to put different types of people, and how to start giving us the um, um, the basics to kind of work with those folks more. Like, for example, when you talk about the generation, um, different generations, you talk about different roles, you talk about different types of folks that
Mm.
we can interact with. Well, how do you approach that? And can you talk a little bit about that in terms of having people into certain categories of sorts?
Yeah, I tried to, and it was a concession, I think, on my part, just because technology people like statement of facts. So I try to put that out. And what it is really is an expansion on the base principles of positive attribution and just assuming that people are entering into each conversation, each project with you with the best of intentions. And I find sometimes we come in and people act in a way we don't expect. And then we say, well, this person is out to get me personally, or this person doesn't understand. And we assume there's something wrong in their character when we just have never made the attempt to understand their point of reference. So if we're speaking to someone who's a baby boomer, they're a late adopter, they're not technically proficient, and they seem really married to a process that's out there, and we're trying to fix that, replace it, automate it, and they're fighting us on it, then the first thing we think is this person's outdated, they don't understand, this is the way the world's going. I'm going to try to circumvent them. I'm going to try to get around this person because they're a blocker and they're impeding what I'm trying to do. And what we don't really reflect on, I think, is that when we were still in diapers, they were the ones that put this process in place. They know what came before. They know the hardships, all the work that went into putting in place. They had those conversations with their predecessors around why this is best. They might know that there's some sort of training program built into that. There's all of these ancillary considerations that they have in their head, and we discount that. We say this person is too old to understand, so I'm just going to try to push it through and go around them. And we lose so much knowledge and so much um, you know cultural embedded ideas that are in those frameworks because we dismiss the individual. And that's what I was hoping to do with this is try to break them out. So if you're dealing with someone in finance, what's usually important to them? Why did they get into it? Think about them from that perspective. And then from another intersection, it's a baby boomer. Why? What did they live through? What was important to them? What did their career probably look like? And then look at it from another perspective. They're technologically, a late adopter. Why is that probably the case? What can we get out of them? What can we learn from them? So trying to see them as a different combination of characteristics and to use that to our benefit to understand the frame of reference so that we don't just dismiss them as an obstacle in what we're trying to achieve.
Since you mentioned the baby boomers and
Mhm.
kind of some of the traits and misconceptions, let's talk about the millennials and the Gen Zers. How can we in general approach that?
I'm right on the cusp of millennial and Gen X myself, so I can speak to that one. I find millennials have been dismissed a long time. They've been blamed for all sorts of things. They're seen as naive and not hard workers and stuff. And then we've slowly, in the background, built credibility. We've come into leadership positions, and then the focus has just shifted to now. Gen Zers are the embarrassing ones, and they don't work very hard. And every time we do that with the younger generation, and we haze them before they come into the workforce, and we dismiss them and say that they're lazy. And it's happened everywhere. It's happened for the boomers. They were called lazy hippies by the silent generation. It happened with Gen X. They didn't have abusive parents like the boomers did. And it happened with millennials because it's just happened with every generation. And it's unfortunate, but it's probably just, part of our genetic makeup to do that. What I find with Gen Z, and I've had my share of frustration with them for sure. They're flippant. They don't take their works. All of those stereotypes that are out there
Mhm.
are true from my experience. But it comes with an absolutely amazing capacity for multitasking that I've never seen. I'm completely incapable of it. If I have a distraction and I'm lost to the world, but they can organically hop between so many things at once. So I found for them specifically, if I give them one project and let them go away and slowly work on it and learn, that would have been amazing for me. That's how I learn the best, is deep focus. And then a Gen Zer will come back and say, "Oh, I'm bored. Give me more things to work on." I'll say, "No, pump your brakes, slow down." But for some reason, if you give them five things to work on, they'll do better at all five things than if you give them only one. I forget the word for it. They do the same thing on TikTok where they have multiple feeds going at the same time. But so it's just, you need to work at their level. You can't expect them to change the way that they work based on what you're most comfortable with. So if you're able to be adaptive as a leader, you can get the most out of your team regardless of their their lineage.
Yeah, so definitely as part of being empathetic in terms of understanding the audiences that we speak to, either Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Zers, and i- it's it's very important to understand to see things as you point out in terms of from their particular perspective. Since
Hmm.
you also mentioned a couple things in terms of other function, like by business function, what other tips would you suggest for building empathy perhaps with other business functions, like the people either in marketing or those in sales? What are some of the couple groups that you mentioned in your book?
I find sales is quite interesting just because they're so motivated, and if they see you're working on something that's going to improve their KPIs, because they're usually
Mhm.
financially incented to hit certain metrics, so they're very aggressive, very transactional. I've seen a lot of teams in other organizations where they'll partner quickly with a sales team. And just like the shy guy at a party, you befriend the popular guy, they introduce you around, and then if they disappear, you're kind of left out there hanging and you don't know how to handle yourself from a social perspective. And I find analytics teams quite often will do that with marketing and salespeople. They get overextended. They pick all the low hanging fruit in that department, and then they don't know what to do with themselves. I find quite often when they're working with strategy teams, there's a lot of opportunity there. Of course, that needs to be data driven. But the thing they do there is that they don't understand the language. They don't. They think it's fluff, and they try to mimic it, and they lose their sense of perspective because they don't know exactly what they're saying with this
Oh.
group. I find with HR, uh, we are so distant in terms of what motivates us that we try to break everything down into quantitative metrics to make ourselves better understood. They try to do the opposite. They try to talk about engagement and retention and all these things. And they try to change their perspective to meet us halfway. And we end up with projects that aren't operationalizable because both of us have made concessions and didn't really understand each other. So there's a lot of nuance, and I don't even know if you can learn about the different business functions without interacting with them. It's like riding a bike. You need to skin your knee a few times before you figure it out. But I think the more exposure that we have to them, the better, because we tend to understand and see similarities between these different functions.
Yeah, and when it comes to bringing that just a topic of empathy overall, like to a team, like, hey, we need to have more empathy. How do you bridge that? Because some people will think like, oh yeah, this is kind of like soft,
Yeah.
mushy item. So how do you make the case, or if any of us wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit more about but that subject with the people that we work with, how would
Hmm.
you suggest we go about that?
The quickest way I can sell it usually when I'm talking to individuals is to say that it's going to make you more professionally successful. And I think that stands to reason. If you go into a room with 10 geeks and nine of them see their role as writing code and one of them sees their role as helping you out, you're going to just relentlessly promote that one person that's there to help you. So you're definitely going to see professional advancement if you start practicing empathy. The other thing, though, and I think the deeper one is, even if you're just an individual contributor, I shouldn't say just, if you are an individual contributor, you're a specialist, you like the work for its own sake, you're still going to benefit from it in your sense of personal well-being. Like the other nine people in that room, even if they love code for the sake of code, they love technology, practicing empathy is going to vastly improve your sense of well-being. I've uh, I hope I'm not being scandalous. I've probably worked with 1,000 technology workers in my career, and we're not a healthy group. We're neurotic. We're constantly stressed. We tend to have, worse social lives. We are less likely to be involved in sports, and a lot of that I think is because we're so disconnected from other human beings. Like we weren't developed to sit in front of computers and type. It might give us a hit of dopamine, and we've trained ourselves to do it. But we are social apes. We need to be in groups. We need to be helping each other. And when for our job, someone tells us on Monday, Jeremy, this is your task, and when I'm done, I move on to the next one. I never meet anybody besides my scrum master. I've devolved into an assembly line worker, and even worse because I never meet them face to face. I'm just talking over Teams. And the biggest
Mm,
benefit, I think, is that if you're empathetic and you reorient yourself to people rather than the technology, you're going to be healthier. You're going to be less neurotic, less stressed, better hormone balance. You'll sleep better. You're going to be a different person. You're going to be healthy. And it's exercising one of our most primary needs.
love this in terms of getting healthier and also getting promotions on the way, because certainly people, those who
Exactly.
help out the most, so make it, I think that there's a case made right there. So Jeremy, thank you so much for your time today. What do people have to do to get in touch with you, or if they have any questions and want to understand more about the topic?
Yeah, I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so you can follow me on there, Jeremy Adamson, and my website is rjeremyadamson.com. Please do reach out. I love talking about this stuff and being able to coach people, help organizations, whatever I can do to support. I'm happy to connect with people in this field. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening today. Before you leave, make sure you go to my website, hardcoresoftskillspodcast.com, and sign up for my weekly newsletter. Then go to the review tab and leave a review. It is the way to ensure this podcast is discovered by others. Remember that by learning soft skills, you make your hard skills work for you. See you next time.